This is Force 13 Live. Hurricane Irma is a 175 mile an hour Category 5 storm at the latest update, which has just occurred. And we will have more updates on the storm coming up very soon indeed. It is approaching the Leeward Islands at that intensity and is probably one of the strongest storms in that area. It's pretty much an annular storm at this time, and we will have more updates in due course. That has just occurred, and I will get more specifics for you as soon as possible. I can tell you right now that it's got winds of 175 miles per hour with higher gusts, and a special advisory will be issued in 10 minutes, which is the scheduled intermediate advisory for Irma. It's also got a pressure of 929 millibars. The wind speed has been verified by the recon plane, 2 recon planes that have just been in right now, and we're obviously watching this very closely. Hurricane warnings are in effect for all points from Antigua to Puerto Rico, all points in between Barbuda, Anguilla, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, Saba, St. Eustatius and St. Martin, and St. Barthélemy, the British and US Virgin Islands. A hurricane watch for Guadeloupe, also a tropical storm warning there, and also in Dominica. We're just setting up here at Force 13 HQ, so I don't really have much going on right now, but in the meantime I'm just going to leave this running for a few moments before we can bring you some more news whenever it comes through. Just the latest breaking news is that Irma is now a Category 5 on the Saffir-Simpson scale with winds of 175 miles per hour. We'll have more on this shortly. A reminder, as we continue to set up here at Force 13 HQ, we're beginning earlier than planned. We were originally scheduled to begin at 2 PM UTC, but we're now going to be beginning as soon as possible because Irma is a Category 5 storm with winds of 175 miles per hour, verified by Reconnaissance plane, 2 planes, in the last 5 to 10 minutes. We're still awaiting at this point the latest update from the National Hurricane Center. As I said, we're beginning this stream earlier than anticipated because Irma is a Category 5 if you've just joined us, and we will be monitoring the situation and bringing you more updates throughout today. We'll be here to take your questions pretty soon when the event starts. I anticipate we'll be ready in the next 10 minutes, and obviously we'll bring to you the latest National Hurricane Center update. But start your question with Force 13 all in text, and it'll show up for us nicely, and we can take your questions on the storm as it continues towards the west. We'll also bring you up some satellite imagery in a few moments' time. PM UTC, and we've got the breaking news of 15 minutes ago that Irma became a Category 5 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale with winds of 175 miles per hour and a pressure of 929 millibars. At 8 a.m. the update is out and it's at 16.7 degrees north, 57.7 degrees west, 270 miles east of Antigua, 280 miles east-southeast of Barbuda. A hurricane watch has been issued in the Dominican Republic right now from Cabo Engano to the northern border with Haiti, and a tropical storm watch from south of Cabo Engano to Isla Saona rather. Just got a bit confused there because the National Hurricane Center might have made a spelling mistake, but those are the warnings right now and they're floating about on the bottom of your screen. So it's a Category 5 and maybe the models aren't playing around after all. Storm surge will now become an issue as well. Storm surges are expected in the following locations, or, well, the National Hurricane Center specifying the following locations. The British and US Virgin Islands, except St. Croix, 7 to 11 feet. The northern coast of Puerto Rico, 2 to 4 feet. And the southern coast of Puerto Rico and St. Croix, 1 to 2 feet. And rainfall amounts are likely to reach 4 to 8 inches with isolated maximum amounts of 12 inches. Needless to say, the wind speeds will be phenomenal. Let's see if we can get some new satellite imagery up, if at all possible, as we wait for more information on the storm, and also wait for some of our team to join us here. But at the moment it's just me here. I'm Nathan Foy, by the way, talking to you from Force 13 HQ here in the United Kingdom, and we will be joined by whoever we can get hold of throughout this afternoon. If you've got any comments or questions for us, send them in immediately, and we'll talk about them. We'll respond to them. Indeed, there is one. Can Irma grow stronger? Well, some models seem to think so. Whether it will or not is maybe unknown, because it does have the annularity about it, which might increase or decrease strengthening. Who knows? Let's see if we can get the imagery up now. Here's the latest image of the storm. Now, it's supposed to animate, but for some reason we're not seeing an animation occur, but that is the latest from Irma, and you can just about see on the left hand side Antigua and Barbuda, very close to the edge of Hurricane Irma. We should be able to get a visible on that as well. Yep, there's the latest visible image of the same thing. That's how it looks on visible, and if you want you can sort of have a dilation of the two. So that's how it's looking right now. Hurricane Irma's a Category 5 storm with hurricane warnings in effect, and it's got winds of 175 miles per hour, and it could intensify further. It started the day at 150 before now, and now it is 175. Obviously all along the islands we'll be looking at severe, possibly worst case scenarios for many of the areas, such as Barbuda in particular is the one that I'm concerned about, because Barbuda may well get the eye or the inner eye wall, and Antigua won't be too far away, and points onward there you're looking at places like St. Martin, Anguilla, St. Kitts and Nevis a little bit further on the edge, but they're all under hurricane warnings, rightly so, as is Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and things could get pretty serious there too. It's one of the storms, one of the classics that we haven't seen for quite some time in this part of the ocean. Not many storms get to Category 5 before entering the Caribbean, before reaching the westernmost Atlantic, the area near the Bahamas and Florida. Many storms have done that, but not many storms have done this. Not least get to 175 miles per hour. I'm not sure, being unprepared for this on the historical data, whether a storm has done that in this area or not. But Irma has. It's got an eye temperature now of around 14 or 15 Celsius above freezing, which is also pretty high, but the reconnaissance flights always trump our satellite analysis, because surface observations are always a more adequate means of measurement. So they've recorded winds of 175 miles an hour, a pressure of 929 millibars, and that's what everyone will be bound to stick with, at least for the initial few hours after that advisory just came out. So let's see. Excuse me, by the way, I'm still fairly unwell after recent days, but we are here running the coverage. So, the latest questions. Can this be a Wilma scenario? Well, no, because it's not in the same area Wilma was in, and Wilma was a much different storm in its complexion. It was never annular. This storm is almost fully annular. This storm is more comparable to Isabel in terms of structure than pretty much anything else in the area. Only this occurs, and this has occurred much further south. And the other comparisons to Wilma just don't really stand. Obviously made a major hurricane landfall in Florida. That might be the only other thing that occurs, and we'll obviously be looking to see whether that happens in the next 5 days. The National Hurricane Center's forecast track is somewhat of a concern if you are in the southeastern United States, because you're looking at it there and you can see the last major hurricane dot now has it just south of the lower and middle keys of Florida, in the Florida Straits, which could possibly be hinting at something like maybe even a Labor Day hurricane scenario, or a Hurricane Donna, or something that curves round and possibly strikes the western coast of Florida early next week. And Jacob picks us up on that nicely. What are the chances that it hits Florida or the Gulf Coast? Well, I thought you said it on the Gulf Coast, but you mean or the Gulf Coast. Well, Florida will have some impacts. The fact that Florida will have some impacts is pretty much a fact at this point. You can see on the wind probabilities on the right hand side that the National Hurricane Center thinks there's a greater than half chance of the southernmost part of Florida and the Keys to have tropical storm force winds. And you can see that most of Florida is under some degree of wind probability, and the coast of Cuba obviously very high chances. And the worst case scenario here is if this storm doesn't make landfall until after Cuba. Initially, model runs and such were suggesting that that it might go into Cuba, make landfall there, but now it looks like it might just graze the coast. Obviously, this forecast cone could change and does change, but at the moment, not looking very pretty. But the first and foremost concern goes to the Lesser Antilles, the Leeward Islands, all of those areas that are under hurricane warnings right now. As I say, we've been preparing for this for some time on the stream here. Whilst the breaking news was occurring, we weren't supposed to begin our coverage for another 2 hours. So do forgive me for the next 2 or 3 moments whilst I take a short break, just to allow other people to join us via the social platforms and possibly as a guest here in the studio. So as you continue to look at the National Hurricane Center's graphic, and who knows what their forecast cone will say next time they issue one. I don't know whether they have issued one in light of the circumstances. I doubt it. The next one is, in fact, I think they have issued one. Yes, this is very interesting. The National Hurricane Center predict that by the next forecast point, that Irma will reach winds of 180 miles per hour and then gradually weaken as it moves towards the rest of the Caribbean, Greater Antilles. I wonder if there's a new update to the track map right now then reflecting that. Yes, there is. Let me just get this up onto the screen. So there's the latest. So the National Hurricane Center thinks that Irma will have winds of 180 miles per hour by the time you get to the first forecast point there, the first M dot. And by the second dot, which is when it's pretty much making its closest approach possible landfall on Barbuda, by then it will have winds again of 175 miles an hour according to them, and it will stay as a Category 5 according to the National Hurricane Center now until the fourth dot, and then remain at 150 mile an hour plus for the rest of the forecast cone. Now that, in my opinion, is very concerning indeed, and you're going to see more watches and warnings be issued further along the Turks and Caicos Islands and the Bahamas and Cuba and Florida eventually, because this is pretty serious at this point. Now a Category 5 with 175 mile an hour winds if you've just joined us. The current eye temperature is 15 Celsius as far as I can tell, and again, let's, if we can, bring us back to the latest satellite imagery. There it is. You can just about see the islands on the left hand side, Antigua and Barbuda, and Barbados further down, is it? No, those are the Guadeloupe further down there, and then Dominica below there, also under tropical storm warnings. But you can see the complexity of the storm there, and it's two distinct bands that extend around the eye. It's not a complete donut really, but it's pretty good right now in terms of a storm intensity standpoint. But that's the latest, and it's the first Category 5 that we'll be observing on the GOES 16 satellite. And I don't think all of the imagery is currently working on the storm, but never mind. But you can definitely see how it's been progressing, and its movement, as far as we can gather from there, is still pretty much towards the west. Here's a visible image as well, or several visible images loading. As you can see, the storm on visible imagery always looks better on the visible than it does on the infrared usually, but you can still see it there, and that's remarkable eye in the center as it continues to move towards the west. And the cirrus areas of the edge of the storm won't be too far away from land now, and that will be something that will be occurring later this evening, and things are going to get really things are going to deteriorate really quickly Tuesday night into Wednesday on those Leeward Islands. So let me reiterate the latest. In fact, let me read out the discussion from the National Hurricane Center right now, which I think it will be beneficial for everyone. NOAA and US Air Force Hurricane Hunter aircraft have recently measured peak flight level winds of around 195 miles per hour and surface winds of 175 miles per hour, which is what we base the intensities on. Some additional strengthening is still possible, but fluctuations in intensity are likely during the next couple of days. due to an eyewall replacement cycle. And no change has been made to the track forecast just now. So Irma is expected to affect almost certainly the northeastern Leeward Islands as an extremely dangerous Category 5 hurricane, accompanied by life-threatening winds, storm surge and rainfall. Hurricane warnings are in effect for portions of the Leeward Islands as we've seen. Preparations should be rushed to completion as tropical storm force winds are expected to first arrive in the hurricane warning area later today. Irma is also expected to affect the British and US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico as a dangerous major hurricane beginning tomorrow. Could be a Cat 5 there as well. With life-threatening winds, storm surge and rainfall, hurricane warnings have been issued for those areas. Tropical storm force winds are expected to arrive by early tomorrow. Irma could directly affect Hispaniola, the Turks and Caicos Islands, the Bahamas and Cuba as a major hurricane later this week. The National Hurricane Center still thinks it will be a Category 4 by then. Residents in these areas should monitor the progress of Irma and listen to advice given by officials. And there's an increasing chance of seeing some impacts from Irma in the Florida Peninsula and the Florida Keys later this week and this weekend. I would suggest it'll be towards the end of the weekend as it happens. But it's still too early to determine what direct impacts Irma might have on the continental United States. However, everyone in hurricane-prone areas should ensure that they have their hurricane plan in place, which is pretty obvious. Let's see if we can get the latest model spread right now on this particular graphic here. This is what the models are suggesting right now in terms of where the storm might track. So as you can see, it's a rather close-knit agreement for the next 4 or 5 days really. Not many storms now predicting a recurvature at all, and the ones and the ensembles or the outliers there that do are saying that it will still affect North Carolina. I'm not sure that will happen. It's going to go further south, it would appear, though some outliers on the other side, such as the UK Met and now the CMC, take it on a somewhat of an Ike track to begin with through Cuba, and then an abrupt turn to the north in a northerly direction in the case of the CMC towards the panhandle of Florida next to the border with Alabama. The UK Met then takes the storm on a very abrupt turn towards the north long before then, and actually still goes east of Florida by the looks of things, remarkably. The other models in general you can see following the National Hurricane Center's guidance, and then just outside of the 5-day cone from the National Hurricane Center on day 6 is when the storm is expected to make that north turn into Florida. And most models now suggesting that it will pretty much go straight through Florida from south to north and then into Georgia and the Carolinas inland, and probably won't have any more chance of strengthening after its initial landfall in Florida. So obviously the best analogues for this storm right now are still Hurricane Donna and shades of the Labor Day hurricane as well in this in 1935, which was the strongest storm, the most intense storm to ever make landfall in the United States. And Donna, of course, striking the central Florida Keys in 1960 as a Category 4, and then moving into the rest of Florida. There aren't really many other analogues apart from that. Initially we were maybe looking at Hurricane Francis of 2004, but it doesn't appear as though the storm will move that far north anymore. And we're also looking at Hurricane Georges of 1998, which if the storm moves further south, that could happen, and the threat to Florida would be greatly diminished if that was to occur, but it would in turn affect all of the Greater Antilles instead. It doesn't yet look like as though a Georges situation will occur either. Nonetheless, all of those storms mentioned were retired, so it doesn't provide a very good perspective on things at all. Pretty much all signs are pointing towards a retirement, but we'll wait and see on that, of course. But Irma is a certain monster right now in the imagery, which will bring you back to the latest visible here, and also the infrared imagery as Irma continues to progress towards the west. If you've got any more questions for us, do send them in, and I'll do my best to respond to them at this time. It's currently 12:22 UTC, and we are watching Irma, which, if you just joined us, reached category 5 intensity officially just over half an hour ago, and has winds of 175 miles per hour. I'll take a break for a few moments here before returning, and I'll leave you with the latest from the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone and wind probabilities. Okay, well, let's now read out some wind probabilities then for some of the areas that are looking at really the very worst case scenario right now, which is pretty likely for the Leeward Islands. So first of all, we'll begin with, we'll go through pretty much everything at this point. So we have St. Lucia to begin with a 3% chance of tropical storm force winds. Martinique with a 5% chance of tropical storm force winds. Dominica 9%. Guadeloupe 65%, 3% chance of hurricane force winds. Antigua 96% chance of tropical storm force winds and 40% chance of hurricane force winds. I'll just read out the hurricane force winds. Barbuda 81%, St. Kitts and Nevis 34, St. Martin 78, St. Croix 20, St. Thomas 57, Vieques Frederico 33, San Juan 35, Aguadilla 22, Santo Domingo 6% in the Dominican Republic there, 45% chance of tropical storm conditions though, and the tropical storm watches are slowly extending around the island. Port-au-Prince in Haiti, 30% chance of tropical storm force winds, 3% chance of hurricane force winds. Kingston, Jamaica, 9% chance of tropical storm force winds. Grand Cayman, 10% chance, 1% chance of hurricane force winds. Guantanamo Bay, 49% chance of tropical storm force winds, 12% chance of hurricane force winds. Havana, 9% chance of a hurricane, 40% chance of tropical storm force winds. I should think that'd be much higher personally. Grand Turk, 46% chance of hurricane force winds. San Salvador, 17%. Great Exumas, 32%. Andros Island, 29%. New Providence, 15%. All these in the Bahamas. Grand Bahama, 8%. And now to Florida. Panama City, first of all, a 5% chance of tropical storm force winds. St. Mark's, 6%. Tallahassee, 5%. Cedar Key, 1% chance of hurricane conditions. Tampa, 3%. Venice, 5%. Fort Myers, 8%. Naples, 10%. Key West, 21%. Marathon, 22%. Homestead, 17%. Miami, 14% chance of hurricane force winds and 53% chance of tropical storm force winds. Fort Lauderdale, 11% chance of a hurricane. West Palm Beach, 8%. Fort Pierce, 5%. Cocoa Beach, 3%. Orlando, 2%. Daytona Beach, 1%. and Jacksonville 5% chance of tropical storm force winds. So just covering pretty much everything there in terms of the wind probabilities. Elsewhere in the Atlantic, we have two other systems that are likely to form. There's one right behind Irma with a 90% chance of development, Invest 94L, and 95L formed in the Bay of Campeche yesterday and has a 70% chance of development in the next 5 days. So we may well see 3 named storms active at the same time, as if Irma wasn't enough to keep you going. Let's see if we can get some floater imagery of Irma then, and show you how it's been looking in over the course of a few hours, just so that we can possibly get some gravity on just how it's managed to accomplish the feat that it's done in recent hours. If I could just get this onto the screen, there it is. As the frames load there, you can see how the storm's been progressing over the last 7 hours or so, which is what these loops show. The movement overall has been pretty much due west, and you can see on the western side there how close it's getting to the Leeward Islands. That's one particular outlook on it. As you can see in the latest frames, the eye has been warming significantly, and it's been getting much more symmetrical. Though the cloud tops have been fading away a little bit, it hasn't been enough to offset the intensification that the storm's been occurring, that the storm has accrued in the last few hours. If we could possibly go back and get to some other views, the visible perhaps. This is how it's been looking in the last few hours. Obviously, visible imagery arrived just a few hours ago as the sunrise occurred over the storm, but it's taking quite a while to load today for some reason. As the frames load, it's like a ticking clock. And I've been referenced, it almost has a similar track as to Hurricane Ike, apparently. Well, Hurricane Ike was a little bit different, and certainly we won't be seeing the second half of Ike. It won't be going to Texas, but it's not too comparable with Ike, to be honest, in terms of its composure. I guess that the biggest point of comparison will be when it nears Cuba, I suppose. But this storm probably doesn't have a level right now, to be honest. But there we go. The water vapor imagery, we might take your interest as well, just to see where the dry air is. You can see it's lingering off to the western area over there and towards the northeast as well. Let's see if we could possibly get to some wind shear graphics whilst we're here. The shear tendency and how it's been progressing on this graphic. This should be up to date. Yes, and wind shear is indeed dropping ahead of the storm, though a small area where wind shear is rising over the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico ever so slightly, but wind shear there remains only moderate. And then beyond there, you've got very low wind shear again when it reaches the Turks and Caicos Islands and towards Jamaica. Now, anyone wondering about the Gulf of Mexico, well, look at the amount of wind shear that exists there now. Huge amounts of wind shear, and it doesn't look as though the storm would survive over there. Unless it shifts. Well, we'll wait and see on that. And you can also see in the Caribbean also a decent run over there if a storm found itself there. It doesn't appear as though 94L behind Irma, which has a high chance of development, will be the one that does that. It looks like that will also stay away from the Caribbean Sea. And that other area of interest in the Gulf of Mexico just the existence of that area of interest, by the way, will probably keep Irma away from the western side of the Gulf of Mexico, and some models were suggesting it would develop and move towards the northeast, which would make a very interesting scenario indeed for Irma. Let's see what else we can find on there. Well, we glanced through the raw numbers of wind shear. You can see the numbers here. Wind shear very low around Irma in the green areas, and only a small barrier ahead of the storm. So it doesn't look too great for the islanders of all varieties along the Lesser and Greater Antilles. I'll bring some more satellite imagery up there shortly. But just to reiterate for anyone who's joining us late here, that Hurricane Irma has reached Category 5 status with winds of 175 miles per hour and a pressure of 929 millibars, verified by 2 reconnaissance planes which found these wind speeds in the storm. Otherwise, the National Hurricane Center might have stayed at Category 4, you know, but it's a Category 5, and it's going to impact the islands, almost certainly the first islands of Antigua and Barbuda, possibly St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Martin, Anguilla. Probably all of those islands will be affected by a Category 5 storm, and that hasn't happened in a long time. Let's see if we can now bring up a wide water vapor shot from the Atlantic and show you just exactly what's happening in the whole ocean. For some reason my connection's running slow today, so things are really slow to load, and I'm not sure how well the stream is faring up. It seems to be doing okay, but it doesn't appear as though I have much spare in terms of my connection, but we'll do our best. Here is a still frame from the water vapor that should be animating shortly, and you can see again these are in the last 7 hours or so, and you can see how Irma's been progressing, and you can see at the eastern and central Caribbean a little bit dry to the northeast of Irma as well, but the dry air there probably won't be too much of an issue for Irma for the time being. If we zoom out on that a little bit, you'll be able to see Invest 94 on the right hand side. That's the next area that's likely to develop, and Invest 95L, which could also develop over in the Bay of Campeche on the left hand side of your image. A very moist environment in the Gulf of Mexico, but wind shear is high. So if you have any more comments or questions for us whilst we're on the air, then do let us know, or just me in this instance, because it's just me here at this moment in time. So let's see, is there a chance that Irma will go into the Gulf of Mexico and re-strengthen? Well, it depends what you have in your mind when talking about that. It's not, if you're thinking about anything to do with going to the central or western part of the Gulf of Mexico, it's not going to happen. It's going to go to the eastern Gulf of Mexico, if at all, and I would certainly support what the model runs are saying in terms of its turn and how it's likely to occur in the eastern Gulf of Mexico if it gets into there at all. And there is always in the Gulf of Mexico the opportunity of more development to occur, but I'm actually more concerned about the area just before the Gulf of Mexico, to the west of the Bahamas, in that area, the Florida Strait, because sea surface temperatures in that area are very warm, 30 degrees plus. I'll get you a sea surface temperature graphic shortly on that as well, so that we can also have a look at what the sea surface temperatures are showing, and whether there's anything that we can gain from that as well. There might have been 1 or 2 small changes since the last time we looked at it yesterday. Let's have a look. Again, this will take a moment or two here, as it's just myself manning the stream. Will Irma hit Florida, or is it possible as a Category 5, or will it weaken because of the Bahamas? Well, I don't think... Well, Hurricane Andrew will tell you that it doesn't take the Bahamas to weaken a storm, because Andrew hit as a Category 5, of course. The Labor Day hurricane hit Florida as a Category 5. There is a historical precedent for it. It is definitely possible for that to happen for the Florida Keys, or for the southern part of the mainland to be impacted by a Category 5 storm. It's possible. We can't be ignorant of that fact. Let's take a look at the sea surface temperatures right now. So the sea surface temperature showing that the temperatures there 30 degrees plus around the Bahamas and around the southern coast of Florida. And in the meantime, sea surface temperatures for Irma are around 29 degrees Celsius or so. Certainly warm enough to sustain a tropical cyclone for some time. I think the only thing that can really weaken Irma by several categories would be the land interaction at this point. I think it's the only huge barrier for Irma. So let's reiterate what we're expecting over the next few days. The impact will be felt in the Leeward Islands, in Antigua and Barbuda first and foremost. That will occur tonight, followed by St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Eustatius, St. Bart's, and St. Martin and Anguilla by overnight, Tuesday into Wednesday morning, into Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday morning it will start to be felt in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, and it will be in full flow by the afternoon. The northern coast of Puerto Rico in particular is of a significant concern as well. By the night of Wednesday it will be passing through there. Thursday morning it will begin to affect the Dominican Republic, early hours, and it will be at its worst during daylight hours of Thursday for the Dominican Republic. Haiti, it will be Thursday night into early hours Friday. Turks and Caicos Islands the same, and the southern Bahamas, it will be during the course of early Friday for the southeasternmost Bahamas into as late as Sunday for Andros Island, for the effects to go away. For Cuba, it's going to be Friday morning, probably, when the eastern part of Cuba will start to be affected by the storm, and then that will, for the rest of Cuba, the conditions will be deteriorating for the rest of the weekend until Sunday. And for Florida, it's going to be Saturday, probably Saturday night, Saturday evening into Sunday, probably at the latest Saturday evening into Sunday, and then into Florida Sunday, Monday, probably Tuesday. Is there any chance that it will landfall at Caribbean and go back to the Atlantic, says Ton and Gok? Well, I've no idea what that really means, to be honest. A landfall anywhere in the Caribbean, I guess, and go back into the Atlantic. It's if the simple question of the curvature. Well, that's looking more and more unlikely as time goes on. It could still happen, but the model guidance is not with it at all, and it would suggest at this point as though that is off the table now. That it will go back out into the Atlantic, almost off the table, but you never know what might happen. Let's go back to the satellite imagery of Irma right now. To remind everyone, Irma has winds of 175 miles per hour at the latest National Hurricane Center update, and an air pressure of 929 millibars according to a recent reconnaissance plane. and this is the latest infrared imagery of the storm. This is very recent. This image here is from 4 minutes ago. Let's check the eye temperature whilst we're here. 14 Celsius. And I wonder what's going on here right now, because it's looking rather interesting. A possible another eye wall replacement cycle might be occurring, because you can see again there's a little in this area here that I've just marked. There's a little hole there where the temperatures are -47 compared to the eye wall temperature in the middle there, which is in the -50s and 60s. So it looks like there's inner eye wall there. It might be about to give way, and the big black band there will be the one that takes precedent and become the new eye wall of another larger eye. And it may well have the Isabel look about it by the time it's done with that this afternoon, this evening. Given that it's already 175 miles per hour, if it has an eye wall replacement cycle, it may well stay as a category 5 or very near category 5 intensity. So that is quite frightening at this point, because, as I said, it doesn't appear as though there is much, if anything, that will prevent this storm from retaining most of its intensity. This is Force 13 Live with myself, Nathan Foy, here, and a very poor voice, unfortunately, so we'll do our best amongst that. We will be joined by more people later on here on the stream, but at the moment it's just myself here, as it's occurred very impromptu, this stream, with the breaking news last hour that Irma reached category 5 intensity. That news came out an hour ago. And let's see if there's any more question at this time. Questions about the eye wall replacement cycle. Well, the eye wall replacement cycle occurs usually when the eye grows too small to sustain itself, and the eye wall collapses, and a new eye wall behind it fades into view and becomes the new dominant eye wall. And you get the odd occasion sometimes where a storm can have more than one eye wall indeed, but that is quite rare. South Florida news. Well, there isn't too much South Florida news yet, because the storm isn't there, apart from that the state of emergency was declared in Florida yesterday, of course. And as far as effects are concerned, I read out the percentage chances earlier. I think it said Miami had a 10% chance of hurricane force winds and something like 40% chance of tropical storm force winds. It's something that needs to be continued to be watched for, and we can't say anything with it with certainty yet. It's still 5 days out or more from its biggest impacts in Florida. That's further out than Matthew was when further out than when they declared the emergency for Matthew. They did that 4 days out, I believe, when Matthew was moving through Haiti, I think it was, or maybe slightly earlier. So there is still a lot of time, but obviously I think with the media coverage and just the public perceptions of what they're seeing will probably make people go crazy in terms of the preparations and cleaning out stores and such over in those locations. At the moment it's a potential threat. It's not a certain threat, but it is a threat nonetheless, and there are very, very many scary scenarios which are being depicted by the models, but the models aren't always right, and something lesser could happen, but we can't obviously can't be certain about that, and we have to guard against the worst occurring, which is quite possible, especially given what the storm already is. So let's get some more questions. Do you think the path that is being predicted is going to change any more, or do you think it's pretty accurate? Well, the path will always change, but the National Hurricane Center have this pretty much nailed down, I should think, at least for the next 3 days. The 4 and 5 day period is more uncertain, especially day 5. That's the critical point, because we don't know when exactly Irma is going to make that turn to the north, and we probably won't know until the end of this week. And that will make a big difference as to which part of Florida gets the worst of this storm, if any of it does. And it'll just be another waiting game on this one, as Florida always seems to get with these systems, because I guess just because it's such a thin chunk of land, Florida, and the storm could easily go east or west of it. But I doubt it will miss completely, is the point. And some parts of Florida will get hurricane force winds, almost guaranteed. Is it comparable to Super Typhoon Haiyan? That's another question we have. I think that's a bit of a nonsense, personally. It's nothing like Haiyan, and I don't think it could ever be anything like Haiyan. It did have some similarities with Typhoon Bopar, however, earlier on, yesterday. Those similarities are fading somewhat, and I would compare it more to Isabel if what I think is going to happen happens. The circumference of the hurricane, well, that can be defined in several ways. If you want to talk about the wind radius, the radius of gale force winds extends around 120 nautical miles, which is quite far, and hurricane force winds extend something like 40 miles in the storm. And how bad will the Bahamas get hit? Well, there's a lot of the Bahamas, and some of the Bahamas will undoubtedly get hit worse than other parts. At the moment, it would appear that the southernmost Bahamas will obviously get the worst effects of the storm. How bad will those effects be? I would personally be expecting major hurricane conditions, Category 3 plus. So, similar to the wind speeds exhibited during Joaquin in the same areas. Not that it's comparable to Joaquin in any other way, apart from the wind that would be expected on the islands that Joaquin affected. The further north islands remains to be seen, but we'll see. If it runs into Cuba, what effect, if any, will the mountains there have on it? Well, the HWRF model yesterday predicted that Irma would make landfall in Cuba and stay over there for a whole day or two, and in turn it weakened the storm from a Category 4 to a Category 1. That's the sort of thing that happens when the center of the storm stays over land for such a long time. So, excuse me, we're looking for, if the storm does make landfall, it will weaken rather quickly. I have to mention one other thing as well. If the storm remains south of forecast and makes landfall on the Dominican Republic, yesterday we covered the stream and we said, I don't know if we were live when we said this, that no storms, all storms that made landfall as a Category 3 or higher in the Dominican Republic only ever emerged as a Category 1 or lower. So that's how much it can take the stuffing out of these storms, these landfalls. Obviously, would be terrible consequences for any of those mountainous Greater Antilles. But in the grand scheme of things, for places beyond those islands, if it was to hit those islands, it would be a better outcome, but obviously worse for the areas that it affects. No doubt it's going to be bad for some, and quite possibly for many areas of the Caribbean, Greater Antilles and beyond. But by how much in the 3 to 5 day forecast cone, we still don't really know. So let's see. I don't think we have any other questions just now. But again, you're looking at the latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. The news is that Irma is now a Category 5 storm with 175-mile-an-hour winds. That makes it the strongest storm since 2007, officially. Though personally, I don't think either of those storms were as strong as they were. So if you use Force 13 analysis, this is actually the strongest storm to occur in the Atlantic since 2005, and Wilma, which happened to be the strongest storm ever in the Atlantic. Not that this will be. I highly doubt that it will, though some models are saying it will, but those models have been wrong many times before, and there's no real reason to believe that they'll be right on this occasion. The lower pressures and strong northeast winds. Yes, there is a dog somewhere in the background. I do apologise for that. Nothing to do with me. The strong northeast winds in the Gulf forecast for Saturday seems to suggest Irma will not turn north over Florida. Why will Irma turn north? Well, it's probably due to the front that's likely to occur, and if not because of that, it will be because of the disturbance that's already in the Bay of Campeche, 95L, which may well develop, and some models suggesting that the storm, that system will develop and turn northeast, which will then go on to affect Irma, because you can't have two storms going in the same direction. And more questions about about New York, whether it will affect New York. Or specifically whether it will hit New York. No. Whether it will affect New York City, possibly, as a remnant. But that is way too far out and way too speculative for me to say anything more on that at all. What effect will the jet stream have on Irma? Well, it will probably lift the storm out after day 5. Accompanied with the frontal system that we're expecting, or the disturbance that we're expecting, and it will probably accelerate its passage through the rest of the United States inland, is what the models are currently suggesting, but they could be wrong, and it should be pretty straightforward after that. Let's see if we can get a new visible image on the storm. There's the latest visible image of Hurricane Irma. Somewhat mesmerizing, to be honest. You can quite possibly see there as well, with a little bit more clarity, if we could possibly zoom in. Okay, there's the infrared version. So you can just about see the inner eye wall there and the outer eye wall that will replace it after this eye wall replacement cycle occurs, and new eye will be ready to come out pretty soon, I should think. During the course of today. But that's how this storm's been looking in the last few frames. This image is just just about 17 minutes old. There might be a new one indeed, but I don't see one at present. Yep, this is the latest we've got right now. I'll try and grab some more imagery in for the time being, but for the moment I'll just be taking a short break here. There's not much else for me to talk about at this moment in time, apart from the fact that Irma is a Category 5 with 175-mile-an-hour winds, the strongest storm in a long time in the Atlantic. Just looking to see if we can get some new imagery onto the screen. That will be much beneficial for us, and hopefully we will be able to see this progression. Yes. Here's a progression of the visible imagery of Irma in the last 40 minutes. So, a question: will the eye wall replacement cycle weaken the storm? Invariably they do, though probably not by too much. It could even stay a Category 5 in light of the eye wall replacement cycle. But again, here is the imagery and how it's been appearing in the last 40 minutes. I'll just fiddle about with the settings and make it a 60-minute loop, just to have a little bit more context if possible, to show you how the storm has been going in the last hour. And daylight continuing to rise above the storm there. Okay, I think there's some more questions here. What is the strongest hurricane, typhoon, cyclone you've ever experienced or seen in your lifetime? Well, if that's a personal question to me, well, it's an interesting question because there's been plenty of very intense storms that have occurred since I started tracking in 2009. But one of the first ones would have been Meggy in 2010, which was a very strong storm, 885 millibars, just an estimate. Then you had 2011, didn't really have any in particular, and of course don't forget Nida in 2009 as well. That is an understated typhoon that occurred that year. If you look at the satellite imagery, it looked absolutely monstrous. And then you got a Haiyan. Bopa we thought was the big deal in 2012, and then Haiyan came along the next year. And everyone knows about Haiyan, of course. In 2014 there were several 180 mile an hour category 5 typhoons. In 2015 had its fair share of strong storms as well, and then Patricia in the Eastern Pacific, which Force 13 analysed to have a pressure of 871 millibars, by the way. And then in 2016, the Moranti upgrade I thought was ludicrous, and most of the Force 13 team agree. It didn't look anything like Haiyan, even though it supposedly, purportedly, according to the JTWC, has the same intensity now, which I think is laughable. And then, of course, this year we haven't had much so far, though we did have Ernie, which showed a massive blow-up of a massive display of explosive intensification to become a Category 5 storm in the southern hemisphere in April, and then not really anything until this. Obviously you have Harvey for the shock factor, I guess, and how it intensified significantly and caused a huge flooding problems, but this storm is stronger than Harvey could ever have hoped to have been. And it's a much different storm to Harvey, though, if anyone's going to make those comparisons, because it was always going to be the huge flooding threat that it was. This is not going to be the hugest flooding threat. It could still be a flooding threat with 4 to 8 inches of rain expected over the islands, isolated amounts up to 12 according to the National Hurricane Center. But this is going to be for the winds, the storm surge. It's a Category 5 bearing down on the Lesser Antilles, and it's quite likely that this Category 5 storm will potentially make a landfall, or the eye wall will strike, and possibly the eye will pass over places like Barbuda and possibly St. Martin, Anguilla, the British Virgin Islands, and then eventually further down the road the Turks and Caicos Islands, maybe Cuba, the Florida Keys. Could be a Category 5 at any or at all of these points, and that's what we're looking out for. And the National Hurricane Center at the moment thinks that it will maintain Category 5 intensity for the next 2 days. F1 Gaming asks, why has there been so many conspiracy theories on Irma? Well, there's been none coming from here. Who have you been watching, is my question. No conspiracy theories here on the storm. It is what it is. What's in front of you is what is occurring. And What we can tell you right now is what we see, and what we see is that it is clearly a Category 5 storm. The authorities are correct, and it will probably begin an eye wall replacement cycle very soon, if it hasn't already, with the inner eye wall decidedly waning in those latest frames. Chris asks, based on current info, would this be more of a wind risk or flooding risk, and if it hits central, when and if it hits central Florida, tornado risk higher than usual? Central Florida, I mean, you're luring me into speculating here, which is something that I don't really want to do too much, decidedly, because of the massive uncertainty over it. What I do believe will happen is that when it does begin to turn towards Florida, it will slow down. Now that will invariably lead to a higher chance of higher rainfall, but predominantly I would say all of Florida, it's going to be a wind threat predominantly. For all of Florida, I would suggest. North of Florida, Georgia and beyond, it might become a rain threat more than a wind threat. But that's all I can really say about it right now. So that's where we are at this moment in time. It's just past 1 PM UTC, which is 9 AM on the East Coast. And you're looking at Hurricane Irma with winds of 175 miles an hour and a pressure of 929 millibars. So at this moment, this is all we have right now, and if you've got any more questions, I'll be very happy to take them. But I'm just reading through a few other things at this time. Just again, the Irma is a Category 5 storm. Hurricane warnings are in effect for all points from Antigua in the east to Puerto Rico in the west, and all points in between, and Hurricane watch in Dominican Republic. There's a question. I live in Broward County. Should I leave? Evacuate? Well, not yet. We don't know exactly what's going to happen at all yet, and I would no one in Florida should be evacuating yet, in my opinion. There aren't, because we really don't know where it's going to go. And the worst, well, perhaps on the Keys, maybe you should leave, but the rest of Florida, I would say no, not yet. But if I was to say today and go well over the edge, like some media outlets might, and say that people in Florida should evacuate today, I'm not saying that at all, wouldn't suggest it, but if I was to say that, and this storm did not strike Florida in the end, you know, the public reputation would be irreparable. So that's why I'm not suggesting evacuations should occur under any rate until, for another 2 days, I would say, at least. Where will Irma impact? 2 words in one there. Where will Irma impact Florida, west, east, or southern coasts? Well, again, that's another question that we can only speculate on. At the moment, the only thing I could say that has a real threat right now is the Florida Keys. That's all I can really draw myself to say, that they're under real risk right now. And again, do you think it will go east of Florida or west or in the middle? All I can do really is bring you back to the model, or potential model consensus, as we try and find the model consensus. But the model spread looks like this. Well, you can only see half of it there, but you can just about make out the gist of it, and you can see how most of the models, a majority of models, are now taking it to the western side of Florida and then moving up the Florida coast into Georgia and beyond. So that's what we're suggesting is the possibility there. So here we are with the latest on Irma. Again, I'm taking short breaks here and there because it's only myself here at this moment. I've been here for 1 hour 20 minutes with the latest on the storm, and I'll continue to take your questions for a little while longer. We will probably take a break at the end of this hour for a few hours and return with you this afternoon, and then run into the evening. Will Jamaica be affected at all? There's a possibility. I think it had Jamaica with something like a 10% chance of tropical storm force winds. So a fairly low chance of Jamaica being affected. So the best analog for Irma right now is still Hurricane Donna of 1960, and that throws up real concern, particularly for the Florida Keys and for the western coast of Florida. There aren't many good analogs besides, as I discussed earlier. But whichever way, Irma has already cemented its place in history with its current intensity of 175 miles per hour. I can't think of any stronger storms that have occurred in that part of the Atlantic, that have occurred outside of the Caribbean. Or I'll just leave it to my first statement actually, because Andrew of course reached 175 but in a much different location. There is some sort of precedent, but what we're looking at right now is something of extreme grave concern for the Leeward Islands, which are under a hurricane warning. Let me reiterate the warnings that are in effect right now for people who have just joined us. A hurricane warning is in effect for Antigua, Barbuda, Anguilla, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, Saba, St. Eustatius and St. Martin, and St. Barthélemy. The British Virgin Islands, the US Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and its islands of Vieques and Culebra. A hurricane watch is in effect for Guadeloupe and the Dominican Republic from Cabo Engano to the northern border with Haiti. A tropical storm warning is in effect for Guadeloupe and Dominica. A tropical storm watch is in effect for the Dominican Republic from south of Cabo Engao to Isla Sayona. And you look at the wind probabilities once more and you see that Florida has now over a half chance, over a 50% chance of tropical storm force winds from viewers. And I'm not sure if our connection dropped briefly then. Just to say, taking a final round of questions from the viewers before. Typhoon Vermeil in 2001 and Cyclone Agni in 2004, which actually formed pretty much on the equator. So there are two exceptions to that rule there, but on the whole it's extremely rare. And the more questions about why it will turn. The turn will be influenced by one or several combination of things. either a trough that comes through the area on the weekend and will lift the storm up with it. It already missed a trough earlier this week, which is why it started to turn southwest, by the way, and now is curving back towards the west and then towards the west-northwest. It's being pushed down, of course, by the Bermuda High. Storms always in the west, and also whatever else is occurring over the continental United States. Do you think Irma will intensify more? It's quite possible. Will Haiti be safe? Quite possibly not. Northern parts of Haiti may have some serious issues from this storm on Thursday and Friday. Southern Haiti might be okay, but we don't know yet. So that's pretty much all for now, and it's probably just as well, since we seem to have something going on with the connection here at Force 13 HQ. Hopefully that won't be an issue later on today. But we're going to finish up here for now, and we'll be back with more live streaming, perpetual live streaming quite possibly, beginning later today, this afternoon local time, and we'll keep you up to date on our social pages. Search Force 13 all in text on Facebook and Twitter, and you can also add Fool13 FOOL13 on Skype and add extension 9094 on Discord. That's all for now, and we'll be back later. Stay tuned. Irma's dangerous, and we will be back with more later on.